Hello and welcome to the Journeys with PDA Coffee Chat podcast, where we seek community connection and co-regulation while chatting about all things PDA. Hello and welcome to Journeys with PDA Coffee Chat podcast. I'm Heather.
And I'm Kerissa, and today we are back with part 2, talking about nutrition and eating with our good friend Sarah Martin. She is a dietitian and very closely associated to PDA. So she's in the PDA flow. She knows about it. And so we're really excited to come back to part 2. If you didn't catch part 1, go back and listen or watch that one. That lays some really fantastic groundwork for why is it so hard to eat sometimes. It's a crucial part of living, but it's also very challenging for neurodivergent, autistic, and PDAers. So part 1, really, we just dig into what makes that so tricky. So now
And I will link part 1 in the description of this podcast.
Yes.
And
now we're going to kind of expand on, so now we know why it's hard to eat, but what are we going to do with this information? What does that mean for us? What does this look like in our life? So, Sarah, go ahead and give us just a real brief introduction. So that way, if someone needs a refresher, they're up to date on who you are and what you're about.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Sarah Martin. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. Working in the space of supporting eating, feeding, and neurodivergence, which I know for so many of us is something that, is a fairly different concept. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be sharing my experience, my knowledge with all of you today. I am myself an adult autistic ADHD PDAer. And the parent of 3 neurodivergent kids, as well as the spouse of an ADHDer. So we are a fully neurodivergent household for those of you that are just getting introduced to me for the first time. So everything that I'm talking about with you today are things that are so close to me and my experience in my life with my own family that I'm so happy to share with you.
Well, thank you for coming back and chatting with us again. I know that this is a very important topic to our community. I think at some level, all either autistics or parents of autistics, they deal with this. And sometimes it can be really frustrating and almost scary as a parent when you feel like you can't feed your child, and it's worrisome, like that's one of the most important needs to the human, and so that's where you come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touch on that, so well, that it is a fundamental biological need that we have to nourish ourselves, to have the energy that we need to grow and do all the things we want to do and to just simply exist. And when we run into challenges with meeting those needs, of course, it feels so tricky. And, for those of us that are parents, that can be such an emotional thing for us because, of course, we want to care for our kids. We want the best for our kids. But it can be so challenging to figure out, first off, like, what to do, how to do it, where to put your energy, where to put your efforts, what to do with that. And, figuring all of that out in the context of your greater relationship together with your child, with your family, with everything else in life. We touched on in the last episode that none of this is happening in a vacuum, right? Our family feeding practices, our eating experiences, all of that is all happening, alongside so many other interconnected factors that it can feel really, really complex.
One of the things that comes to mind, when you're talking about parenting and how complex this is how many of us as parents and adults have these past struggles around food, the way that we were, raised or parented. I think about, for me, it was very much like you eat everything on your plate, and that came from, that like we can't be wasteful, because if you think about back then, my parents' parents, so my grandparents, and where, we grew up in a ranch rural area, and so you cannot be wasteful, and you just need to eat everything on your plate. And that was such a struggle for me growing up, because there were things, textures, smells, just like there were so many things that came in to factor that made it really difficult for me to want to eat some of those foods. But there was also this like level of maybe punishment or discipline if I didn't fall in line. And we just tend to, like, what we learned, that's what we continue on. And like I didn't eat fruit growing up because my mom didn't eat fruit, right? And so like there's some of these habits or things that we learned that we start to pass on. And then I got to the point when now I have my own autistic children, and it was that like, well, they'll eat when they're hungry. And you, like, if you have to sit here all night and then eat that food for breakfast, then, that's, and looking at, like, that doesn't actually help when the issue is a sensory issue. For me, I was lactose intolerant. I couldn't eat dairy. It hurt my stomach. So eating would make me feel sick. And, we didn't know. So there's so many of those things that as parents we need to break away from and change our mindset, just like with PDA. It's such a, you gotta let go of everything that you expected or you thought was the rule, because it is not gonna work. And so that same idea that we've carried on, you have to eat everything on your plate. They'll eat when they get hungry enough, or you have to just eat what you're given. And the idea of, that we just make the one meal and everybody eats it and you can eat it or go hungry, and that you don't prepare different meals for different people. And which we, I can remember, like, maybe at, like, when my oldest was probably 3 years old, I was like, oh, that idea is not gonna work. That is not. And so that was my PDA too. And so it was like, if she was not gonna eat what was for dinner, like, it wasn't going to happen. And that's when we, you know, after hours and hours of trying to do that traditional, like, dinner time process, we finally had to go, okay, this is not going to work. This is not going to happen. And so I think there's a lot of, as parents, our food experience, our mealtime experience that we pass on to our kids, and it makes it very complicated.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those that aren't watching on video, you'll see me nodding very enthusiastically along here with everything that Kerissa is saying, because these are the things that I hear over and over and over. There's so much that I feel is so relatable in your experience that you just described, Kerissa, of, you know, the things that we experienced in childhood, the things that we experienced growing up, and how that can be passed down to the next generation or not, you know, depending on, like, you know, what we're observing and what we're seeing, and perhaps what knowledge or resources that we now have that maybe the previous generation didn't have access to, you know, either knowledge or culturally or socially, the ability to be able to, you know, see what those needs actually were, what was underlying all of that, and be able to meet their children where they're at. You know, and I think this is something that you're touching on when you're talking about your experience with your own child, is that you're recognizing that these things that, you know, were part of your family culture growing up aren't necessarily things that are going to work well for your own family and your own kids. And so you're questioning that, and you're finding ways to work with that. And really, I think getting to that deeper understanding of, like, kind of what is it that I'm doing here? What is the reason behind all of this? You know, is it because we must follow a rigid rule? Or is it because the whole point is to, you know, meet certain goals of making sure that our child is nourished, making sure that our family resources are protected so that our kids can have what they need? You know, so often we hear about that, you know, finish everything on your plate, you don't want to waste all of this. And it's like, well, why is that such a common thing? You know, so many over the generations have grown up in households where perhaps resources were more scarce and a larger concern. And so it became part of the family food and eating culture that you have to have it when you have access to it, right? And for so many nowadays, and this isn't the case for all families, certainly food insecurity is a very real and very common experience for so many. But for those that is not necessarily the concern in the forefront, you know, it's like we're still living sort of by this old set of rules that we were somehow taught or absorbed, that perhaps maybe doesn't apply as much to what our current situation and what our current needs are for ourselves or for our kids. So again, you know, none of this is happening in a vacuum, and we're it's almost like we're that generation that, you know, we're putting our detective hats on and becoming the investigators and approaching this, I think, you know, with a little more freedom and curiosity than perhaps previous generations had access to. And so this, for me, is actually a pretty exciting thing to see, you know, and I know for so many of us it can feel like such a challenge, it can feel like such a struggle. But there are certain privileges in knowledge, in empowerment, to be able to do things differently for this new generation, to be able to do things differently for our families, for sure. You know, and there are so many different factors that go into why we do the things we do, why we eat the way we eat, why we have certain behaviors and beliefs around food, right? I mean, there's so many different things. There's, our access to food. Do we have access to food in the first place? Do we have access to a variety of food? Do we have access to food that's going to meet our various needs for nutrition, socially, for comfort, for all different kinds of things, right? Types of different foods, all of that. We have our finances, right? Our household finances, and the resources in our greater community might dictate a lot of our beliefs and practices around food. The amount of time we have, right? That, especially nowadays for our kids, for so many school or other type of educational commitments, activities, therapies, all kinds of things, and parents, careers and work and other types of commitments, caregiving commitments, perhaps within the family or outside of, that our time is such a precious resource that, that certainly has a big role in determining, our food and what we eat and what's accessible to us or not. And also our own level of food preparation knowledge, our own level of skill around that, about foods, and being able to kind of work with all of those factors together, And so I hear so often, people are like, oh, I should be doing better, or I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or, oh, this is so hard. And it's like, yes, of course it's so hard. And of course, it's hard to kind of meet what we might set up for ourselves as the ideal in our minds, because there are so many other factors here that are influencing all of this. And, those are things that perhaps are also can be pretty variable for us through different ages and stages, times in our lives, times in our children's development, times in our careers, all kinds of different things that, we're going to see these shifts happening, where what was our need a couple years ago is maybe not the same as it is right now. I think, though, that the kind of really fundamental thing underlying all of this and underlying all that we do as parents, as we try to care for our kids and make sure that their needs are being met, is that sense of love and care, right? So even in those situations that for us, we might look back on our past and think, oh, that was really hard growing up and, having a family that subscribed to the Clean Plate Club of you have to finish everything. But, again, going back to, there's a pretty good reason, perhaps, why that was the thinking and that was the practice. And that underlies the desire to make sure that your child has what they need when they need it. But our desires don't always align with the reality of the situation or what we can do in practice. And so what we really want to try to do here, and what we're going to touch on today, is being able to align that loving care for our families, for our kids, for ourselves, with, given all of the different factors, what is going to meet our own needs? What is going to meet our individual needs, our family needs, that we are able to access? And so, touching back also to very quickly what we had talked about in the previous episode, that, those of us that are neurodivergent, we do have different brains, which means that we have different needs. And so what our relationship with food and eating and feeding might look like might be very, very different than what is considered the norm, right? And so when we get into that kind of concept of, we often see neurodivergent things as being like problematic almost, you know, there's kind of this like, oh, that's so different. That must be there, that must be a problem, right?
That you're
Um,
such a picky eater. Why do you have to be so picky? Don't be so picky. That's one of those things I would always hear growing up. That's
yeah.
like, well, that was a real need. That was my real experience, but yet it was automatically looked at as a negative, like as a fault, instead of someone going like, why is it so hard for you to eat this or that? Like what's going on in your body and in your mind? Like, what is your experience that you just absolutely cannot eat this specific thing or at this time of day? Or another big one is who you're eating with, where you're sitting, what's going on around you. That makes such a huge impact on your ability to eat. If it's a stressful situation, like everyone has to sit at the dinner table, but there's difficult conversation or arguing, then that makes for an unpeaceful environment to eat in. And so, yeah, all of those are factoring into, that's when it's like behavior is communication. And there's always a reason for the behavior.
Yes.
So if you're, if your child is at the dinner table and they're crying, then I think you have to go, okay, what is their experience in this moment? What is the environment? What is the setting? Like, why is it that they can't eat this particular food? And like my big flashback is to have like, it was like roast, and then they would have like the baby carrots, and the carrots were cooked in it, and the carrots were like so soft and slimy, right?
No, so those are the only carrots I like. Are the ones that have been cooked to death with a pot roast.
Right? And so that was a meal that my parents enjoyed. They enjoyed that meal. So for them, they were like, this is wonderful, nutritious, home cooked, fantastic food. And why are you refusing to eat it? Like, why are you crying right now? Well, for me, as a child, I was like, I don't even know. I can't even tell you why. I all I can tell you is I cannot get this carrot swallowed. And it had to do with the textures. And I'm highly sensitive to food textures. And so pausing when you have that difficult food situation come up and go, okay, what is their experience? Why is it that they won't eat this? And of course my parents are like, but carrots are really good for you and they have nutrients and like that type of thing. Well, my children won't eat a cooked carrot for nothing. But then at the same time, I was like, I'm never going to cook a carrot because I hate those. And so we found my kids absolutely love cold raw carrots, and they'll just eat and eat and eat cold carrots. And so like they love that crunch. And they'll they love that. And so it was like kind of stopping and going, okay, what was my experience? What would have made it different? Honestly, if I had been given like crunchy cold carrots out of the fridge next to my pot roast and not eat the cooked carrots, I probably would have eaten those carrots and we wouldn't have had that issue, right? And that's like that small adjustment, but it also goes into that mindset where we grew up in like food. It was like one food for all, and there's no changes, there's no alterations. Like, you take some of all three things that are there, but then thinking about like just substituting raw carrots for cooked carrots would have completely changed the entire situation, the entire atmosphere, and I would have been gaining more nutrition by eating them that way. And breaking down that idea of like, actually you could switch up, you can like make it different for everybody. For some reason my son does not want to eat salad. I can't even, like, he can't tell me why, and I'm like, well, that's fine. You know what he will eat? He will eat a cucumber if it's whole, and he will eat iceberg lettuce whole. And he'll eat carrots crunchy and whole. So
I'm trying to get a picture of that. Like, he takes a head of iceberg lettuce and eats it like an apple?
no, he likes to peel.
Okay. Okay.
He peels the leaves
Thank
off.
you. Thank you for the clarification.
Though I suppose though, if I just like gave him a head of lettuce, he might just like chomp it like an apple. But he currently chooses to like peel the leaves off, right? So like, I'm having salad and everything's all like chopped up. I like them all even, and I like blue cheese dressing. And then I have my son who's eating like whole leaves of lettuce, and he wants a whole cucumber, and he wants whole carrots, and he wants them like on the plate. He doesn't want any kind of dressing. And so it's that idea of like, well, why is it that this is only okay to eat if we chop it up and put it in a bowl? Why is that? Why does it have to be that way? He will not eat a salad all chopped up. But if I give him all of the ingredients on a plate whole, then he absolutely loves it. And like, that's that difference of he'll not eat or he's eating a ton, and he's eating a ton of fresh vegetables, fruits. He eats whole tomatoes. If you cut a tomato, he won't eat it, but if you give him a whole tomato, absolutely loves it. And so kind of like letting go of all of these thoughts of like what food has to be, and realizing that actually there's not all these rules. And one of the fantastic things is that when we have like holiday dinners with my husband's family, and everyone loves to have salad, so grandma always gets a bowl and puts whole uncut fruit or vegetables in the bowl, and that's Stephen's special salad. And so we've also been able to share sort of this out of the box thinking around food with our extended family. And so now it makes it so that our son can actually sit at the table and have a holiday family meal with extended family, and he's eating and he's having fun. And honestly, I think it's really fun for everybody when we all get to have this experience of this really out of the box way of, one person, how they eat their salad. And so Yeah, just like small changes like that have completely altered how my family eats.
That's amazing. Like, truly, what an amazing example, what an amazing story of there's so much kind of that goes into that, right? That excuse me. To me that I'm hearing here. First, you're recognizing your son's needs in terms of his sensory profile and what works for him. You're recognizing his need to feel safe, to have that nervous system safety signal to him in a way that you are making this food accessible to him in a way that feels safe for him. That you are respecting his need for autonomy and that he gets to be the one who decides what he eats and how he eats it. And that your role is just there to make these things available, right? And it's amazing that you're expanding this to your extended family and educating and working together to create that space for him to have his needs met at family gatherings and when you're all together. And it's amazing that you're questioning those norms of like, why is it that we do this? Why is it that this all has to be cut up and presented in a certain way? What's the difference nutritionally? There really isn't, right? There's not. And so, seeing all of that and then finding a way to meet those needs and also recognizing that it doesn't have to necessarily be super complicated, that it might be a matter of like, okay, yeah, we're making pot roast for dinner and I'm going to put some raw carrots on the side for my kiddo that prefers to only eat raw carrots. And I'm going to cook some for those of us that might prefer to eat our carrots pretty well cooked. And so not really any extra work to make that accessible for everybody. And same thing like in what you described in making the salad, where he gets whole vegetables on the side because that's what works for him. It's really not any extra work. In fact, it's probably less work.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that you now don't have to cut up. And so looking at those, really small changes that you can make that can have such a big impact, that, being so attuned to your child's needs and allowing that flexibility for yourself and for your child to be able to figure those out together and to do that together is such a cool thing. So, kind of getting into then, what are these sort of practical things that we can do to help support our PDAers and our neurodivergent kids with their eating and their feeding. I think getting into this first, we talked about in the first episode, the importance of safety to the nervous system, perceived safety, the importance of autonomy. Of course, as PDA parents, all of that must become so central to everything that we do for our families, so that our kids can access what they need. And in the context of food, it's no different. We often learn about different ways to accommodate our kids in other ways and in other settings and things. And sometimes there is a bit of that disconnect of like, it's almost like food is a totally different topic or a totally different thing. And I'll get into that, I think, in a couple of minutes in terms of why it is that we might see it that way. But for now, I do want to jump back into kind of the more practical things that we might do to help support our kids. And Kerissa, I feel like you have touched on so much of this in sharing your own experience already. And this is something I think we got into near the end of the last episode, but didn't really get a chance to kind of go a little deeper. So for right now, I think I want to expand on that a little bit. And we've talked about that flexibility, like you are offering your son that flexibility to eat in a way that works for him. And so for us as parents, it's like, we know that it is our responsibility to provide our kids with food, to provide them with safety, with a place to eat, with things to have, and all of that. How do we do that in a way that meets their needs, And so that does take a lot of that sort of really looking at what it is that we are currently doing, what beliefs we ourselves or practices we ourselves might hold or do around eating and feeding, and why it is that we are doing those things. And sometimes we might not even know, why. This might be the first time we're really getting into that and trying to kind of gain our own understanding of like, what's important here? Why are we doing this? Why is this important? Is this something that we have to do in this way? Is it something that we could do differently? And if we could, what might that look like? What might we do? What might we try? So keeping that open mind, keeping that curiosity, keeping that flexibility is so important. And, even with these things that might not make so much sense to us, that we might not really understand, or it might not even seem that our child really understands why things are the way they are, why they need to be a certain way. Like, with your son of like, can't really explain why a whole tomato is awesome and a cut up tomato is no way. And that's okay. That is absolutely okay. So I think having that flexibility, being able to give them that flexibility in where they eat. So where in the house do they have to eat at a table? Can they eat somewhere else? Can we bring in maybe some tools or some things that make that more accessible? Like, can we put food on trays? Can we, have places and spaces that work for eating in different locations throughout our home, so that we're offering an environment that is supportive with, what we know are often very variable needs, what they need today under whatever the circumstances and conditions for their nervous system and everything else going on, might not be the same tomorrow. And so what we're seeing their needs are and what that's going to look like in terms of behavior may be very different from time to time. And so how do we create that within where we are, within our home, or even outside, if we're in the context of talking about our kids attending school or care outside the home or different places, how do we make those accessible for their needs?
I think making changes around that is one of the most significant things that helped my PDA. There's that idea of like everyone should sit at the table at the same time together to eat. So first there's like the actual foods, but then there's also the environment. And so when we started to look at like one of the most challenging points of our day was dinner. And so when we were like, okay, which part of this is hard? Why is it hard? Well, if you're PDA and ADHD, you can't just sit in a chair. You can't. And so like first off, that like sit in the chair and do not get up. You cannot leave the table. You have to ask to be excused. Like right there, you're immediately causing a disruption for that natural state of PDA and ADHD. So I think the first thing we did was we stopped asking the kids to sit. So, and then also if they were going to sit, like maybe they were crouched in the chair, maybe they were on their knees. My daughter would have to like stand, and like she would be shifting. She might be like dancing. She would have to run to her room, because then all of a sudden she remembered that she had this thing that she needed to show us, and she'd be back. And so allowing just natural movement, it just, like, that was a huge adjustment in the atmosphere of eating. And I found it reduced my stress and my anxiety so much, because if I am trying to force a small child to like sit in one spot, like that was a lot of pressure on me. And so then when I was like, why do we sit? How often as an adult do you stand in front of the refrigerator or stand over the sink and eat a snack or listen to music or eat a cookie and dance? But then I'm requiring my kids to sit in a chair. And so when I was like, no, you want to sit at a table, you want to be at the counter, you want to dance while you eat, fine, like we're all for that. Then we realized with the two kids, and this is especially when they were quite a bit younger, I would say like 6 and 8, and then they would start to both try to talk and tell stories, and then they would fight. And then we're in major conflict, and then tears, and then no food is being eaten. And so by having our kids not eat at the same time was, it like changed our life. And then I found if I was with one kid at a time, whether I ate with the first or the second, you know, or sometimes it would just be me and my husband, and we would eat and then we would feed the kids separate, I found I could connect with the kids so much easier when it was just the one child. Or a lot of the times it would be me and my husband and my son, and we would eat, and we actually were able to talk and connect with our son. And then it would be like the boys would head off and do whatever, and then me and my daughter, my PDA, and so I would kind of be more like cleaning up, picking up, very indirect, but in the room while she ate. And she was able then to stay very calm and to chit chat with me. I was able to stay focused because I only had one child I was trying to care for. And that took that hardest part of our day and completely removed it. And so it really shifted the whole atmosphere of our home in switching up locations, how we sit, when we eat, all of that.
I've had a very, very similar experience with my family and my household, and that transformation from, you know, the early years of we all have to sit together at the table and we have to do it this way, and everyone outside of our family is saying it's so important for their social needs to be able to sit together and be able to sit at the table and understand what's expected and do things a certain way, and you can only connect with them if you take that time every day in this very specific way of doing this. And it was very, you know, through the years, like, we would have so much conflict and so much dysregulation during our meal times, because instead of looking at what was right in front of me and, you know, questioning and being curious about like what is actually going on here, and what is actually going to work for us here. I'm listening to all this stuff that, was so external to our very personal experience in our family relationships with us together and food and everything that, I'm like, oh, but I'm just keep trying to do it this certain way, and it is very obvious that it's not working. And for a little bit there, I had that experience of thinking that the problem was me. The problem was I'm not trying hard enough. I'm not pushing hard enough. I'm not getting it right. And then, in coming to learn about PDA and learn about my kids and their neurobiology and, kind of why is it that we are this way, and why is it that we seem to have this particular set of needs and things. And it was like that total light bulb moment of, we're not the problem. The problem is that we're trying to do something that is just not a good fit for us. So what is going to be a good fit for us? And when we were able to recognize that, and when we were able to make those changes very similar to the ones that you described, complete, night and day difference. You described so beautifully that experience of co-regulating with your kids during meal times by actually separating different members of the family into kind of different times and different spaces. And that's what worked for you. And, my own experience with my own family has been very similar, where it feels almost completely opposite to what I was taught, and particularly what I was taught, in my professional training as a dietitian. When way back, it was 13 years ago, I became a dietitian way back when I was in school and learning all of this. There was such a big kind of emphasis on, in family nutrition, that it's so important to get the family together around the table. It's so important to have these shared meal experiences. It's so important to do things in this certain way, and to promote this and to teach this. And that's not going to be the case for many of us, and particularly those of us that are PDAers. That may never be what works for us. And, we get, I think also too, very caught up in the ideas of, oh, well, our kids we have to be doing certain things so that our kids will learn what these social expectations are. They'll learn how they need to eat, so that way if they ever go to a restaurant, or if they ever go eat at someone else's house, they'll understand and they'll be able to do what's expected of them. And it's like, we're getting like 10 million miles ahead,
Right.
with the assumption that, number one, our kids would want to eat in a restaurant. Number two, that like that's something that, would be something that is even going to be accessible for them for quite some time. We may not be there yet. That may not be something that, is something that's going to work for us. And so why are we preparing for something that, often is a more rare occasion than being at home? And why are we putting so much energy and emphasis into this one thing when everything at home is like, we're so not there yet. We are so not there that, we're trying to push for these things, that it's like, can we just figure out a way to help our kids access food first?
Right.
Like we're making so many assumptions here that's like, whoa, bring it on back.
Let's worry about let's
meet them where they are. Let's meet them where we are.
Yes.
Right.
And so I can say, when I had an 8-9-year-old who could not sit and had to run around and couldn't even sit at the table with the whole family or with her brother. Now, at 15, we do not sit down at all four and eat at the same time regularly, but there are special meals that both kids enjoy. We can sit down and have a really nice meal together. We can enjoy like extended family meals around a table. And we can go to restaurants, and my daughter's not standing around the edge of the table dancing. Like, so we just took care of what she needed when she was 8, and then when she was 9.
Yep.
And then what she needed at 10.
Yep.
And now at 15, it's, yes, she's completely capable of going to a friend's house and sitting down with their family and eating. Restaurants, like ordering food, having a conversation with others, eating around other people. Though, like, those skills build on each other. But if you don't start way at the beginning, then it's just like chaos forever. And so I lived it and can say, yeah, it's okay to let them run around at 8, because at 15, they can still have those table manners and those social skills. Like, those can still develop. When I look back, knowing what I know now, I'm like, I'm so thankful that I decided that she could stand up and run around the table instead of us crying every single dinner. I'm so glad that I made the choice to switch things and to put peace and calm and anything that you can eat is going to work right now, but let's be happy and peaceful and calm. And that's our main focus, not what kind of social dinner table skills will you have at 25. Let's just be calm and not have to spend hours crying at dinner every night. And when I made that the priority, I can look back and go like, yes, oh, that was so worth it. It was so worth it.
Yeah, you're prioritizing their well-being, and you're prioritizing that relationship that, is the most important thing. That our kids, they won't be able to eat. They won't be able to access these things unless we are providing them with that safety. We are providing them with ways to help regulate, with ways to meet their own needs, and giving that respect to their autonomy, giving that respect to their needs, and understanding that even if they can't express the why exactly, trusting them to know what it is that they need in that moment. Very often with our kids, we do get so caught up, I think, in this sort of very medicalized view of neurodivergence, of autism, of ADHD, of PDA, as being these problems that need solving, or these things that, they need intervention. And in this case, it was that backing off and that freedom and that recognizing, like, hey, I'm going to prioritize my relationship with my child over, intervening in a certain way, making them sit at the table, making them, interact with food in a certain way or interact with other people in a certain way. That, opening that up is what allowed for all of those steps in their development to unfold very naturally. You're saying it's not the same when they were 8 as now at 15, that this looks very different. And I'm guessing that that probably wasn't due to a lot of effort and conscious pushing them in a certain direction to do certain things. It was actually that, hey, I love you and I trust you and I'm here for you and we're going to do this in a way that works for us. And I'm here to support you and I'm here to respond to your needs in a way that preserves your autonomy, that preserves that loving and trusting relationship that we have. And that's such a cool thing. And with that alone, you know, that opens up so much possibility, so much that I think we often think like, oh, if we don't do certain things, if we don't do stuff, these will never get there. You know, this will never happen. And, you know, at 8 or whatever age, maybe it's just not time for it to happen yet. Maybe there are other needs that need to be met. Like obviously there was a need to get up and move. And a need probably there that was helping with regulation, that was probably helping with them, with their sensory perception of their environment and their eating and their things. You know, I have one child, my youngest, that went through a very long period, a few years, where they needed to be up and pacing when they were eating. Mm-hmm. They just could not sit down to eat. And, you know, I think that that activity helped with that brain-body connection where they are then able to recognize their own body signals and what it is that is happening, you know, as they're eating and their sensations and all of that. They needed movement to feel grounded in their body. And without that movement, if they were just sitting in the chair, they wouldn't be able to eat because they didn't have that connection. They weren't able to access that sense of what their body needed. And so, you know, that was so puzzling at the time as a parent, but now looking back and seeing like, oh, this was something that, you know, they really needed to do, and it actually enabled them to be able to eat during meal times and feel that their body was getting full or feel that their body was hungry. And, you know, every child is different, every person is different. You know, this is what worked for my child in particular. But I think, you know, for most of us, there are kind of those different things. We might have a need that looks different, and we might have to do things in a different way that we can't quite explain yet. And it may not be, you know, readily apparent why, but can we give the space for that to happen?
So one of the things that I know I've experienced in my family, and I know a lot of other families experience, is a child who has a very limited variety of foods. So they only have a certain number of safe foods, and that can feel worrisome for parents, because of course we're going back to that nutrition type thing. And so, you know, I shared a little bit, like, my son has just a few safe foods. He doesn't like to really try new foods. But then we also discovered that if we don't cut up vegetables, then like he'll eat them. And he absolutely loves fruit, all fruit. And so we give him lots of vegetables and lots of fruit. But then kind of outside of that, though, he's really just has a few foods that he likes to eat. And parents tend to get really worried about that. And so, for example, my son will eat fruits, and he will eat vegetables. he then will eat corn dogs, and then he will eat, he makes himself this sourdough pesto turkey grilled cheese sandwich, which is really interesting when you think about somebody who does not like to eat a variety. And the one thing that he loves to make for himself and he eats every day is actually quite exotic. But it's something that he can make on his own, which is, now that he's 13, that is very important to him. Oh, he also will eat frozen cheese pizzas. So that's kind of it. And so there's that natural parent instinct to sort of be like, oh my gosh, like that's not enough variety. Is that enough nutrition? And that's what we do. So if a parent comes to you and they're like, my kid only eats corn dogs, cheese pizza, and grilled cheese sandwiches,
Ritz crackers and Nutella.
And so if I were to come to you and I'm, as a parent, I'm like, I'm genuinely concerned. How's he going to grow? Is he getting nutrition? What are the three recommendations that you're going to say, here's your first three things to start with, or three things I want to share with you concerning that?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, I think first thing is, can we look at their history of their growth and their development? Are they growing? Do they seem well physically? What does that history look like? And do we have any signs that they are actively showing right now that they are malnourished, that there may be any kind of a deficiency? And if we're not seeing signs of those things, then they're probably doing fine. If they're growing, if they feel okay with what they're eating, if they're having the energy to do the things that they want to do, if they are, if they don't seem bothered by it, and kind of all the things check out in terms of, are they growing, are they developing, are they generally healthy, then generally for me it's kind of like, well, do we need to make changes?
Right.
Do we need to intervene? If everything else looks okay with what they're doing, do we need to intervene? Do we know if this is something, I guess second thing would be like, do we know if this is usual for them or not? Do we see kind of, those types of expansions and contractions that we touched on in the last episode, where we might see these big variations in either the amounts of foods or types of foods and things that our kids find acceptable and can access, depending on the context of everything else that's going on for them. Are they in burnout? What other stuff is going on? Is there, recent changes or other demands that are kind of adding up in their life right now, so that they're having a really big expansion in some other aspect, and so perhaps their eating and their nutrition and their number of foods or variety of foods is contracting, because if something else is expanding, something else might need to contract for a little bit. And that may not necessarily be a permanent thing. And so if we can look at that as well, of is this maybe just something that is temporary, that maybe we need to just support the big picture to help them find their way and to access regulation and to just make sure that they have the safety and the support that they need overall, and just kind of give it time to work itself out. Of, we might see this now and this looks kind of scary or different, but in the long term, is this really going to have such an impact? Can we kind of just give this the space? And third, I think in this case would be, okay, so if we do have these specific concerns about their nutrition, perhaps there are, really valid things that need to be addressed in terms of making sure that they're getting nutrients. If we're, seeing if it seems to be something that is going to be longer term, where they might need specific support in that area, then we start looking at, what can we do to help support them overall that is going to help create the best conditions that we can give them, to see that expansion of being able to access more foods, being able to access perhaps a greater number of foods or greater volume of food, or whatever that may be, or even to the point of being able to access, if we can't get to, foods yet, and we're looking at things like nutritional supplements and things that can address a specific concern, can those be accessible to them? We're looking in kind of the more holistic picture, the big picture of everything overall, of how do we support them? And so we're looking at the relationship between parent and child. We're around food and around other stuff in life. We're looking at the relationship with the child in the context of the family, or, the greater community, perhaps, especially for some of our older kids, that we might see things become more challenging and more difficult as they get into phases of life where it's not necessarily just about the family anymore and their relationship with the family. How are we going to help support these different things so that they can access what they need? And so it can feel pretty complex, and I think very often in the interventions that are recommended, whether that be through different types of feeding therapy or behavioral therapy, that we get so focused on what we see as the immediate problem and wanting this short-term change, that we can lose sight of the long-term goals and what is really at stake here. Of, okay, if we are perhaps in some kind of a therapy where we're focusing on getting the food in, bite counts, things that are really compromising their autonomy, so that we might see a little bit of weight gain happening. Yeah, okay, maybe that we would consider that, a short-term success, and I'm putting success here in quotations for those that don't see the video, that we're compromising perhaps a lot of things down the road in terms of the relationship with food, the relationship with the parent and child, the relationship with the family, and that sense of safety and autonomy. And so what looks like short-term success might actually end up causing bigger problems for the longer-term future. And so, it all feels, I think, for so many of us, so very sensitive and so very delicate when we find ourselves and our kids in these situations where, we have these very real concerns about their health and their well-being. And we want to be able to support them, and we want for their needs to be met. But we have to look at that big picture. And we have to, for the majority of kids, I think, be willing to allow that space and time for these things, like Kerissa, you talked about with your child, allowing that to sort of unfold and develop naturally. You made room for those kind of ideal conditions for that to happen, and then it was able to. And so it's really no different, with our food, that we want to be able to give our kids these conditions where they can expand, where they can feel safe in trying new things. They can feel safe in exploring their own limits and boundaries when it comes to their food and eating and feeding and nutrition. That often when they are supported, we will see that their tolerance opens up, their capacity opens up, and we'll see that over time, perhaps, we start to see these changes. We start to see these expansions where they're able to eat more or more variety or access things that they couldn't access before.
Yeah, I just think about if I were to have to count calories for my son, or bites, or like you're required to try this other food. With either of my kids, the loss of free will and autonomy would cause, I think, more difficulty and more problems than the original, concern. And so one of the ways I've done it is to kind of give that freedom and that space, and just worry about right now. One of the ways that I introduce foods is just by having food available. And so my husband and I will always be eating different foods than the kids, but the kids always have the choice to share in what we're eating. And sometimes I will be completely shocked because one of them will want to eat what we're eating, and I'm like, oh, really? Okay, yes, have some. Sometimes it looks like fork straight from the pan. Maybe they're going to get their own dish with 2 little bites. A lot of the times I say, well, take a bite off of my plate first before I'm going to eat it. It's already dished, it's prepared, it's all set up. I've had times where I say, take a bite of my plate, and when the kids will like it, and I'll just then, we'll just take my plate, I'll get a new plate for myself. Where if I were like, okay, well then, if you like this, go dish up your own, they'd be like, not worth it. So some of those types of things, I bought some organic chocolate cereal, because my son has a limited amount of foods that he enjoys, but he's also 13 and growing, and so I'm trying to get creative in how to up his calorie intake. And so I came across this organic gluten-free chocolate cereal, and I was like, I don't know, that looks kind of good to me. So I bought the box, but what I did is I just gave him the box of cereal, brand new, in his bedroom. And he doesn't do dairy because he's lactose intolerant. And so I just gave him the box of cereal in his room. And he can just crunch on it when he wants and how he wants. It's in his room. He doesn't have to get up and leave. He can have a snack anytime. I'm not checking how much he's eating, how much he's not eating, or when he's eating it. And so it's just all this autonomy. And this was a brand new food. It was my idea, but it just was like, hey, I thought this looked good. Here you go. And so turns out the type of food, the way I introduced it, and the environment that he's eating it in, he loves it. And he likes to eat it late at night. It's a late night snack, and he will probably eat the whole box in maybe just 2 days. But I'm like, oh, wow, new food, new nutrients. He has this choice to eat, and we're adding in more calories to fuel his body. And there was absolutely no pressure associated with that. And if he had tried the cereal and then was like, it's actually pretty gross, then I would have been like, oh, that's cool. You don't have to have it. And, we would have found somebody else to eat it. But just like that really gentle way of introducing that to him. And he's not even my PDA, but like that really indirect, gentle, no requirements method of introducing a new food, it works really fantastic for him. And so we're seeing tiny bits of him expanding in what he can eat. And then now he's like, hey, I need another box of that cereal. And I'm like, yep, okay. And it's his bedroom cereal. And we have a very broad generalization that we don't eat food or keep food in our bedrooms because bugs and whatever. But that, he has to have his bedroom cereal, because if he had to leave his room, come to the kitchen, get it bowl, anything, and those are autistic inertia and executive functioning, and all of those factor in, he's not going to do it. And so that's the difference between he's going to eat, he's not going to eat. And so a box of cereal in his bedroom, he's older now, so I'm not worried about messes. He's great at picking up garbage. And so now that's that make or break deal in if he's going to eat those calories or not. And so I'm making sure that he has the opportunity to access that food in a way that he can. Because if he had to leave his room, he's so less likely to be able to do that. And executive functioning and the timing, and there's so many other things that can get in the way, or that feeling of I'm kind of hungry but I'm also busy, and so I'll wait and I'll wait and I'll wait. But if you have bedroom cereal, then you're just able to meet that hunger need when you're hungry.
Absolutely.
Let's normalize bedroom cereal.
Yes.
Yes. I'm thinking bedroom Oreos, but
He does. I did notice that he had a pack of gluten-free Oreos in his bedroom yesterday, and so, and that's part of too. He's kind of realizing okay, there are certain foods that I can just take and I can eat it in my room when it's easy while I'm playing a game. And, you know, I make sure that he has a full-size garbage can in his room. That's the best way to like make sure that the garbage is managed, right? And so it's like also equipping them with like all the support things that they need. So yeah, if you're gonna eat Oreos and bedroom cereal, then let's just have like a full garbage bag.
Yeah, give them the
Garbage
tools. Give them the tools they're going to need to be successful.
Yes.
And trust them. I think, and just trust the kids. Just trust them.
Yes. And to me, it's probably pretty important for a 13-year-old boy to be able to very easily wake up in the night, be hungry, and eat a snack, even if it's Oreos. You know, like the rate at which he's growing now, I'm like, yeah, like midnight Oreos in your bedroom, that's totally fine with me. You know, like the big, huge, tall water bottles that stay super cold, you know, hold a lot of water. So, you know, those types of tools and resources that make eating easier. And it also goes back to, I just make things accessible. And so like, he just has the things that he needs. I know some of these food stuff he likes and they're just in the pantry and he can just put it in his room. One of the things, you know, growing up, I always had to be like, can I have a cookie? And how many cookies can I have? And then realizing I would rather him eat like 8 Oreos than not eat at all. But if he has to ask me, then he's not going to ask, and then he's not going to eat either. And so that was one of those things that we had started out in that traditional parenting that we were like, no, like, here's why you shouldn't eat 8 Oreos at 4:30 in the afternoon. You know, like, here's kind of why, but at the same time, then if that's all that you can eat, okay, like, you know, he does take a high quality multivitamin to make sure that we're kind of filling in those gaps. But yeah, you don't have to ask me for a snack. You don't have to ask for you don't need permission to eat. I think about, like, if I had to like hunt somebody down in my house and ask permission to eat, man, I would hate that. Now, I think it's different if I were like, could you help me find? Could you help me prepare? So that's one thing. But I think we start to get kind of confused in teaching our kids to ask for food there's a difference between, can you help me find it? Can you help me prepare it? Can you help me clean up? Versus, am I allowed to eat a certain food when I want it? And so that's one of those other traditional parenting things that we stopped doing. I'm like, don't ask me if you can have a fruit snack. You want a fruit snack? Go eat a fruit snack. Yeah. Maybe you need 2. Maybe you do need 2 bags of fruit snacks. Like, I don't know what your body needs. You do. Now, if you eat 5 bags of fruit snacks and now your stomach hurts, I guess you've kind of learned where that line is on, like, how many fruit snacks should we eat. But, yeah, like, he can have the Oreos in his room, and don't ask permission to eat. If you want help making food, I'm right there with you, but you don't need my permission. I don't need permission to eat. I'm not like asking my husband, like, do you think it'd be okay if I had a fruit snack right now? He'd be like, I don't know, it's pretty close to dinner. You probably need to wait. Like, that would be terrible. I would hate that. So why would my child not feel the same restriction and frustration over having to ask permission?
Yeah, which with our PDAers especially is like, obviously clear, immediate loss of autonomy, of that needing permission for anything. And for something that is such a basic need as food and eating, that, for so many of our kids, that having that barrier in place can just shut everything right down, as you described, of like, he would not be able to eat this if he had to come ask permission. And that, that also that piece of recognizing where our kids are developmentally in terms of their skills, their executive functioning and other skills to be able to access food and get things for themselves and be able to plan for eating and coordinate getting food, or coordinate and be able to execute cleaning up after eating and things like that. And what are those barriers or potential barriers that are in their way of being able to access food and being able to have what they need, so that, like you were saying about the trash can and the having food out and having it just be available to them, and inviting them in to have food with you in a way that isn't pressuring them, but it's just like, oh, hey, I have this out and it's here if you'd like some. Or, oh, I just tried this. It's really tasty. I wonder if you might want to try a bite. And offering those kinds of opportunities consistently and frequently, I think, is the key, because so many times we will make those opportunities and our kids, for whatever reason, will choose not to or not be able to engage with them at that time or in that place or in that way. And that's okay. We can just be like, okay, not right now, and move on from that, and, kind of keep trying again. I think going into it with the mindset of, being like an experimenter, of, not being so set on one particular way of doing things or one particular outcome, just like, oh, I'm going to try doing this, and I'm just going to kind of sit back and observe and see what happens. Exactly like you did with the room cereal, where you were like, hey, I have this idea that, like, maybe this food is something that he might want to have, and it might, be easier for him to access if I leave it in his bedroom. So I'm just going to leave it there, and I'm going to back off, and I'm going to observe what happens. And so you did. So you saw, like, oh, hey, that actually worked out for him. And he's now expressing a desire to have more of that. So we're going to lean into that for now. And, that may not always be what the need is. That may not always be what the case is. Especially with our PDAers, things do tend to change, and, they will mix things up on us from time to time, where it'll be like, oh, room cereal worked so well for a few months. And then all of a sudden it was like, nope. I am so done with that. I don't want to do it that way. And then, we kind of go back to that place of like, okay, cool. That's not the thing anymore. What else might we try? What else might we do? And so, going back to that flexibility of like, okay, how do we make this accessible to them? And so finding those little opportunities or making those adjustments of like, oh, hey, we do have concerns about bugs in rooms and things like that. So we try not to keep, food in places where it might attract things that we don't want. That would be a problem. But like, how do we make that accessible? Can we put a trash can in there? Can we build into our own routines that we are working with our kids so that we can make it just kind of part of our culture and our routine as a family that, someone, whether it's the child themselves or the parent, is doing kind of a nightly sweep of, do we have stuff out? Are there dirty dishes that need to come to the dishwasher or things like that? So we can be mindful of those concerns because those are real concerns, but also find a way that works for us where we can do that.
When my son was younger, we used to keep a dish pan outside of, one of those old, I guess it's not old time, you can still get them, but we would keep a dish pan outside of his room. And that's where the dirty things, dirty dishes and stuff could go. And we still do have that. I'm in a much further physical place than my son is now. We're in a different house. And now he brings up his dirty dishes, which is really, really nice. Because, sometimes you just run out of spoons or you run out of glasses. So it just goes, it's just another way of making things accessible for them and just some accommodations. We're human. There's not a human alive that doesn't need some kind of accommodation in some form, whether you're neurodivergent or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, leaning into those accommodations with that understanding that they are in fact accommodations,
Yeah.
right? There is a real and valid reason why we are choosing to do these things in this way. That it's not just because,
It's not spoiling. It's not letting
No.
them get away with everything. It's not any of those things. You are
Yeah.
accommodating a disability. Autism is a disability. ADHD is a disability. PDA is a disability. And, some people get really, they don't like to put that term with these things. However, I would think that if you need these kinds of supports and accommodations throughout your life, this is a disability. And why wouldn't we accommodate a disability?
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think, that word disability can feel very charged.
Yes.
For some people, for many people. But I think if we are breaking that down and we are looking at the actual word itself and what does that mean, what that means is that there are going to just be certain things that do not work for us in the way that we are built or the way that we are wired. And so an accommodation is really just finding the way that works for us. It's not about us. It's not about that. I think to me, the way I view it is it's not a negative thing. It's just a different way that we need that support, that we need to figure out what it is that works for us and have that provided. And, with neurodivergence, I think there are going to be those accommodations that perhaps may need to be lifelong. And so these are things that we are understanding and making, allowances for and accepting and committing to. This is the way it has to be in order for this need to be met. I think there are certain accommodations that are more short term as our kids grow and as our kids develop, and they're in different stages and different things and have different needs and different levels of capacity and ability, that what we're doing for them as an accommodation now may not be something that is needed a few years from now or even a few months from now, or depending on where they are. And so these ideas of like, oh, you're going to spoil them, or you have to teach them that it has to be this way, or you have to like make them figure out how to do it for themselves or this or that. It's like, I often will say my thing always, people will tell you, is like, all in good time,
Yeah.
all in good time. Like, we're just going to meet them where they're at, and we're going to go from there, and we're going to figure it out along the way based on what we're seeing and what we're learning, and how we are coming together in this relationship to collaborate on making sure those needs are met.
And that is such a perfect picture of PDA.
Mm-hmm.
And just that's how PDA flow goes in every aspect of your life. And that's such a key piece to supporting PDA in all ways, and neurodivergent children and people. Absolutely, just amazing information. I'm so grateful for you to meet with us, not once but twice. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing all of this wisdom with our community. I know that you're giving words of encouragement, and you're giving words of peace
And permission.
Permission,
yeah.
of all in good time. And so, Sarah, thank you a million times for sharing so much. Thank you for bringing peace and calm and confidence around such a challenging topic. And thank you just for being part of our Journeys with PDA community. What a light that you are bringing into us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been such a pleasure to be here and to share all of this with you and to spend this time with you. And I thank you so much for the privilege of being able to do this today.
And we will put your contact information in the in our episode description when we get this published and put out. And if you would like more information about pathological demand avoidance, you can reach us at journeyswithpda@gmail.com. We are on Facebook and Instagram. And yeah, if you need something, get in touch with us.
Let us know. Check out our website, journeyswithpda.com. And thanks for hanging out and chatting with us.
And it's okay. We give you permission to go out and get some bedroom Oreos.
Yes.
All right. Take care, everybody.